everyone, I'm Christina, and today we're going to be making a muff in a style that I haven't really seen being worn much. The fur-trimmed velvet muff is underrepresented. So I have some research that I want to share with you. Then let's make a muff in this style together.
Hand muffs are a necessary accessory for keeping you warm and fashionable, be it in the chill of winter or at an event in the evening. Yes, these are mostly carried by women, but there are lots of historical images of men carrying muffs as well. And because muffs require very little material and are so necessary, people with impressions of all socio-economic levels can have one. I was intending to focus on the 18th century when I started my research, but then found evidence of this style across the eras, and a lot in the 19th century, especially in the art of the American painter George Henry Boughton. The fur-trimmed velvet muff was his favorite style to paint, and he placed one in the hands of women from many time periods. Full fur muffs have been the most common throughout history. After about 1780, silk-covered muffs became very popular, but before then, I think the next most common style was the fur-trimmed muff with a velvety fabric center. This style pops up a lot if you keep an eye out for it. I've put every image I can find of this style on my Pinterest page, so you won't have to search as hard for inspiration as I did. Links to everything will be in the description. Alright, this is my Pinterest page, and scrolling through, it looks like there are a lot of blues and reds. Some muffs match the ensemble, some don't. And if you look at the fabrics, they look like velvet. And we also see lots of different kinds of fur. And historically, there were plenty of choices when it came to velvet. Historical options include velvets made from silk, cotton, and wool. This is a rayon silk blend velvet. Most things sold as silk velvet today are going to be a blend, but for our purposes, that is just fine. Cotton velvet was very popular beginning in the second half of the 18th century and may be referred to as Manchester cotton, as it was commonly manufactured in Manchester. Fortunately, we have access to a wide variety of cotton velvets today. Historically, wool velvet was seen as a working man's velvet, although it is much more difficult fabric to find now, but not impossible. There will be links to recommended sellers of all these options in the description. For this project, I will be using a red cotton velvet and will be cutting mine 14 inches long by 10 inches wide. These muffs were pretty small. Imagine holding a tiny little adorable muff in your hands. Just make sure your hands fit in it. My finished muff will be just under 7 by 10 inches. Yes, you can tear cotton velvet. Just keep your lint roller handy. To iron your velvet without crushing it, place another piece of velvet underneath it, right sides together. This keeps the pile looking luscious. I will be using a combination of wool flannel and wool batting inside the muff we make today. Any colors will do, as these won't show. These are from my stash. I use wool batting from a large piece originally sold for making quilts, and I've been using pieces of it in various projects for years. Most images that show this style are kind of floppy looking, so you don't really need to stuff these full. Just have in a filling to keep it cozy. For lining, a simple linen will do. This is the fabric you will mostly feel, so make sure it is comfortable to the touch. Silk muffs have covers that are gathered over a linen cushion, so I'm guessing linen was considered a good fabric for the inside. To prepare the pieces to be sewn, I'm going to trim about 1/8 of an inch off of the flannel and then 1/4 of an inch off the batting. This will allow the fabrics to curve inside the muff without bunching up. You know how when you're making a burrito and the contents squish out as you roll it into shape? Yeah, we're trying to avoid that. Okay, let's pin our pieces right sides together and sew. I'm going to trim the lining a ½ inch shorter than the velvet, again to avoid the squish factor. So that lining piece will be 13.5 inches by 10 inches. Before I sew this though, I'm going to add a pocket. I've read about people keeping warm stones or a hot potato in their muff when extra warmth was needed. Instead, I'm going to cheat and use an electric hand warmer that I got for Christmas this year. And I need this pocket to hide it in. Also, it never hurts to have an extra pocket for your necessaries. I'm going real simple here and creating a pocket by overlapping 2 hemmed pieces of fabric. The lining will be sewn in later, but we can prep it now. If you have a pocket, make sure it's on the inside when you pin and sew. Great! Iron your seam open, and now we'll move on to preparing the fur trim. Of course, real fur would have been used on original muffs. Everyone has different opinions on using real fur. I personally try to only use vintage fur. However, I did buy this bunny pelt for a huntress project where I specifically needed a whole pelt. Well, I haven't used it yet, so let's use it today. The fur pieces need to go all the way around each side, so I need 2 14-inch strips. That's more than the width of this pelt, but I should be able to get 7 inches, then I can piece it. I want my fur trimmed edges to be as wide as possible, so we're going to just divide what we have into 4 sections. If you're going to have to reassemble pieces too, be sure to mark the grain of the fur so that you can line those up when sewing. Let's find the center and mark the 7 inches we need on either side of that. We mostly want this luscious central fur. One benefit of using faux fur is that you probably won't have to piece anything. When you cut fur, make sure to use a blade, not scissors. We just want to cut the skin, or in the case of faux fur, the backing fabric where the fur attaches. Again, your lint roller will come in handy. Make sure your grains match if you're joining pieces together. You can use binder clips to hold the pieces in place while sewing if your fur is too thick for pins. I tried both ways and pinning the fur worked a little better for me on this project. To join the pieces, I'm going to do a large, wide zigzag stitch on the machine. Sew both edges with fur sides together. Let's figure out where to attach the fur. My fur strips are 3 inches wide, so I'm going to line the edge above the fur about 1.5 inches away from the edge of the velvet. That should leave me enough to turn in after accounting for the bulk of the fabrics. Let's measure and pin the fur in place with the grain of the fur pointing outward. Again, let's use a wide zigzag stitch. My muff just barely fit around the arm of my sewing machine, so that may be something you want to keep an eye on if you're planning to make an especially dainty little muff. We are now ready to insert the lining. Tuck it inside the muff so the raw edges of the seams are together. Check how far the fur can wrap around to the inside. We want to sew the lining to the velvet at this distance from the edge, which will accomplish 2 things. First, we do need to securely sew the lining because you don't want to accidentally pull it out. And secondly, so we have a guideline when sewing the fur down. Mine will be sewn 1/2 inch from the edge. I ended up with less wiggle room than I thought. It's time to sew the fur to the inside. You kind of have to do this by hand. I recommend rolling the lining to the outside for a few inches so it's easier to access. I used double thread so my needle wouldn't keep slipping off. Anchor your thread to the lining, then grab a small chunk from the edge of the skin right above your anchor point. Go up through the skin side and out through the fur side. Now, bring your needle back down through where your thread exited the lining before. Allow the needle to pass between the fabric layers for about 1/2 inch. Pull your thread through and grab another chunk of the skin and fur directly above, then back down through the same place on the linen. Travel the needle another 1/2 inch and continue to repeat all the way around.
It's done. I'm so excited. I even dressed up to match my project. I think the only thing I would change is I might try to put a button on the pocket because my hand warmer kind of slipped out when I tried to put it in there. But other than that, I think it's beautiful. I look forward to wearing it. So thank you for joining me today. Check out the links in the description for more information, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Go make something glorious.